Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Podcast. Our guest today is Josh Dorfman. Josh is the CEO and host of Supercool, where he shares proven climate innovations and the business playbooks behind climate companies scaling fast to build a low carbon future. Josh, thanks for taking the time to chat.
Thank you, Krish. Great to be here.
My pleasure. There's no dearth of things I know little about, but this one in particular, I know very little about. So I'm super excited to talk about everything that you do in the space of that relates to carbon and emissions and climate change and whatnot, right? So the topic that we had picked here, loosely speaking, right? The conversation is going to be fairly fluid, but at the highest level, I just want to call out for the two items that we want to talk about. But before I mention that, if you could give a brief introduction, Josh, about yourself, your company, what you do, so the audience becomes a bit more familiar, and then we can roll just into the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have spent the better part of my career trying to solve or trying to create climate solutions that actually cut carbon in the business world. So developing ways to boost profits for companies at the same time that they can lower their carbon emissions. And usually one of the other outcomes of that is that the customer experience or quality of life or something goes up at the same time. And so this really has been my North Star, having started a number of different companies, having worked for Amazon, where I built a business called Vine.com, which was like an online Whole Foods before Amazon bought Whole Foods. So like natural, organic, sustainable products. To companies I've started with, for example, I started a company called Planted with two former engineers from SpaceX who had been there for years and years and left and joined me to build a company that would make building materials out of grass instead of trees and build first of its kind technology that rapidly removes carbon from the atmosphere and locks it away inside the walls of new homes. All that kind of innovation is what excites me, what I either try to build myself or create media companies, which is what Supercool is, to tell the story, not just of the companies that I run, but really this innovation economy that is now at commercial scale with many, many solutions like this from hundreds of companies that are doing the exact same thing across industries to what I would say is build, you could call it the low carbon future. I would really just say it's actually just building the future, because the future is going to look clean, abundant, and like something we're going to be very excited to go build, not so we don't die from climate change, but actually so we actually get to a better, brighter, more advanced civilization.
Wow, okay, that's a fantastic introduction, right? You said a number of things there, a lot of which I know again little about, so it's going to be super exciting. I'm going to start with the very basics. I've running a startup for many years. I've realized that things sometimes you're presumptuous about things that other people may or may not know. So I'm going to start with the very basic, right? So we get people sort of acclimated to the main part of the conversation. Can you give a brief introduction to people who don't necessarily know what carbon emissions means? I mean, a lot of us know it's a bad thing. It's not good. You need to have low or zero, net zero. You need to get towards that. I have questions about how companies claim to be doing that, and sometimes they may not necessarily be accomplishing that. But before we go to those levels of details, for somebody who's not familiar with this at all, right? Climate change and carbon and emissions and why this is even a bad thing or a thing that they should even be worried about. What would be like a 2 minute introduction to the topic?
Yeah, I think perhaps the most straightforward way to understand the issue is that through the Industrial Revolution and into the world that we occupy today, human activity increasingly has relied on fossil fuels, right, as the energy source for that activity, whether it's how we drive our cars, how we heat and cool our homes, how we run our factories, the where we go to work, and how all the systems in those buildings. All of that, when you're burning fossil fuels, the pollution is carbon dioxide that goes up into the atmosphere. And as that pollution goes up into the atmosphere, it essentially starts to, without getting too into the science behind it, it just basically you start to get what's called the greenhouse effect, where heat is being trapped right within the atmosphere. And as that happens, the planet starts to warm. and it's caused by human activity. So the more we go about our lives and the more we're burning fossil fuels, the more we're creating pollution, the more we're heating up the earth. And that's, you could call it global warming, which would probably be more accurate than climate change. But the climate is effectively changing and warming as a result of human behavior and human activity. And so there has been a big push, which is really accelerating in terms of, especially where we are in terms of the technologies that are now available to us at scale and at really attractive prices, to switch to alternatives to fossil fuels. And that has a whole cascading effect of things that need to happen to actually switch to sources that are different from fossil fuels. So that would be solar energy or wind energy, that are much cleaner, create much fewer emissions, geothermal energy, pulling heat from the ground as a source, a natural source of heat, and can also be turned into cooling. Really a whole suite of technologies that are designed to enable civilization to replace fossil fuels, and what I would argue, without sacrificing in any way, but moving into a more abundant, prosperous future. But nonetheless, that is the notion. Like, how do we eliminate the burning of fossil fuels and all the resulting carbon emissions associated with it to live in a cleaner civilization where we're effectively solving that challenge?
Perfect. So let's say as a planet, you want to achieve a number of things that you mentioned there, right? It's not one country doing some things versus another country doing it. As occupants of planet Earth, I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong, all of us have to do our part so this larger goal is achieved, right? I have a question here, but would that be a reasonable summary saying that it's not one country, a set of people living in one part of the world, world by world, I mean, our planet, but everybody living in every part of this planet needs to sort of do the exact same type of things to help reduce these emissions?
Well, the thing about any of these questions is they can become dissertations in their own right, right? So there's a short answer and there's probably a much, much longer answer. The short
Okay.
answer is yes, of course, we share one planet, right? So pollution that goes into the atmosphere from the other side of the world is still going into a shared atmosphere, right? That oversees all of planet Earth, or that surrounds planet Earth. So in that sense, yes, the what happens in one part of the world certainly impacts what happens in another. We're all kind of tied together into the same ecological system. I think it becomes more nuanced if you were to look at, say, what we do in America or what we do in Europe, how we live, or even what we do in Canada versus, say, and all the energy we burn in our lifestyles versus, say, someone who lives in Ecuador or someone who lives in Kenya, who simply, by virtue of how they live a much more modest lifestyle where there's far fewer carbon emissions and pollution associated with how they live. So all of the things we need to do, yes, are very similar. The playbook is very similar, but it's not evenly distributed, kind of what's required of people around the planet.
Right. The reason I even ask that question is one of the things I've seen, just over the years, reading about something along these lines, even if not explicitly, but very implicitly, when I go to read something else and I stumble upon a topic that relates to this, is there a debate of question of, hey, you know what? I can do everything perfectly living in this part of the world, right? We have a set of rules we follow, and then we reduce these emissions to the extent possible. But if somebody living in another country or companies that exist in other parts of planet Earth or other parts of the world do not follow or abide by the same set of rules, then what you're actually attempting to do and achieve by virtue of your rules, does that actually become a moot point? Or do you still have to do your part even if the rest of the world is actually not doing what you're actually wanting to do and are able to do?
It's a very fair question, Christian. I would suggest that it perhaps used to be the right question to ask maybe a decade ago or 20 years ago. I don't think it's the right question to ask anymore, because I think the right question to ask is, what can I do and what can my community do, and what can our society do? What can we do to reduce our carbon emissions here, let's say in our country? Because I know that if we take those steps, we are going to make our economy stronger. We are going to make our society healthier. We are going to actually live higher quality lifestyles. because of all of the technology advancements that have happened in climate-related technologies. So the paradigm that says, if I do this and I suffer and others aren't suffering by doing the same things in another part of the world, that no longer applies. Hardly, it doesn't even apply anywhere. You have today countries like Pakistan, for example, that in just 1 year added enough solar panels onto their grid, I think, to replace like 25% of their fossil fuel grid in 1 year. And they didn't do that worrying about whether any other country was going to do it. They did it because they said, this is the cheapest form of electricity that exists, and we don't want to import energy from other countries anymore if we can just have homegrown energy that's cheaper, cleaner, and better, and it gives us more autonomy as a country. Right? That has nothing to do with what anybody else in the world is doing. They're solving climate in their own country because it serves their self-interest to do it. That's the world that we're starting to occupy.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense, right? So it's not like you're doing it necessarily because you want to reduce carbon emissions, right? I mean, maybe climate change or global warming, as you mentioned earlier, maybe that's not necessarily the prime objective in this example, but they have to do it because it's cheaper, better for other reasons, and then it's just the help that they're doing towards lowering carbon emissions and global warming. It's sort of a byproduct, right? It's not their original objective, but they're able to achieve that because they have to do it for other reasons, essentially.
That would be my perspective. And what I hope is that more people start to understand that that really is the opportunity available to all of us as we think about what it means to reduce carbon emissions today. Right? You can look at it through either lens. You're absolutely right. You could still think, oh, well, I'm choosing to buy an EV car, and how come, those guys over in some other country aren't buying EV cars? And like, that's not fair. You could look at it that way. At the same time, you could go 0 to 60 in 2.6 seconds in that electric car, right? And that doesn't really sound like a big sacrifice. And you could never have to go to a gas station again, and that doesn't sound like a terrible sacrifice, right? There are all these and you could pay less for your energy that you're running your car with versus gasoline. That doesn't sound like an awful sacrifice. So that's kind of what I mean. People still look at this issue through, most people still look at climate change through this lens of sacrifice and suffering and giving up, right? And living worse than we're living, today if we try to solve it. I just think that's a very outdated point of view when you look at the options that are available that happen to reduce carbon emissions, reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Those tend to be today far superior from a quality of life point of view.
Agreed. So, Josh, I've done a little bit of travel, not a whole lot. I don't travel much, but even in my limited travels, when you go to different parts of the world, the conversation that you tend to have around this topic, again, very implicitly, right? It's not like you're opening a conversation saying, I'm going to talk about global warming with a group of friends or climate change, but it just happens organically. I've seen that, like, say, I come from the southern part of India, and when I have had these conversations, let me rephrase it. When you're in certain parts of the world, I feel like you have more of these conversations than in other parts of the world, right? So in the US, for instance, or you're in Europe, it feels almost on one side to me personally that we are a bit more conscious about the carbon emissions, the need to reduce carbon emissions, and all of these other related items. At the same time, we are also the same people that are building 1 gigawatt data centers almost every other day. I live in Loudoun County. I see a data center like every 1,000 foot I look on any side. So, is there a bit of? I have a couple of questions here, but just I want to get your thoughts on if someone were to, if I play the devil's advocate and said, Josh, there's a bit of hypocrisy here because on one side we talk a lot about carbon emissions and what it means to the environment and how we need to reduce this. On the other side, we are the very same people that have these 250 megawatt or 1 gigawatt data centers that are cropping up in every part of the country as we speak. So, is that hypocrisy here, or is it just two ends of the spectrum?
Well, I like that question. I would never deny that hypocrisy is at play because, yes, it would be very easy to point fingers at the US and say, here you are telling the rest of the world you should do XYZ to solve climate, which, by the way, under our current president and administration, we're no longer doing, right? We're no longer with this administration actually thinks that the technologies I'm talking to you about are scams. And
Right.
so, right, it's a different dynamic. But let's stay on this point of the data center and maybe what's happening in India or elsewhere. First of all, what's happening in India, which is fascinating to me, is India, from a clean energy perspective, is growing far faster, at a faster rate with solar than certainly than the United States has ever grown. And I had an entrepreneur on Supercool on our podcast, this guy Manoj Singh, I want to say, who started his company called Husk Power in India probably about almost two decades ago. And basically what he started with was saying, how am I going to bring electricity to rural parts of India where there simply is no electricity? Maybe there's diesel generators, which are very, very expensive, never mind like all the pollution. And he figured out a way to build these mini grids, right? Which first was, I think, taking like waste rice husks or something and gasifying them and turning that into energy and stringing electric wires from bamboo poles, because they had to do a system that was cheap enough you couldn't even like reinforce them with concrete in the ground or whatever. He's like, but let's just see if it works. And it worked. And you had people who were like, he said to me, he's like, we put this, I don't remember which part of India he was in, but he was like, we put this in a village, and someone an elder gentleman in the village turned to me and he said, we became an independent country in 1940, was it
1947.
47? Yeah. Okay. So he's like, about 60 years ago, he's like, this feels like Independence Day for me, because I finally have the electricity to be able to live life in a more modern context, or whatever, something really, really
Amazing.
profound.
Yeah.
Then he said to me, and then I'll stop with the India stuff, but then he said something to me that really struck me. He said, so by the way, he now has 300 of these like mini grids. A lot of them are in India. Some are now in Africa. He runs the largest kind of distributed, basically like utility in the world with these 300 power grids. Like, incredible company, what he's doing. But then he's like, we started a residential solar company in India. He's like, and I think he also, I don't know if he lives in Virginia. I'm not exactly sure. I can't remember where he lives. But he's like, here I am in America. You guys invented basically e-commerce. You're not even using your e-commerce tools to sell solar to people. So like your costs of installation are so high. You've got these systems that are stupidly high because you gotta spend all this marketing money just to get a single customer. And then the way you deliver and install stuff makes no sense. We just took all the things you invented in America, and now we're like, I have this other company where we're putting solar on roofs of Indian homes. We're going to be on 1 million homes by 2030 in 5 years. It took there's only one company in America that has enough solar panels to be on 1 million homes, a company called Sunrun. It took them way more than 5 years. And so what I see is like the rest of the world is like, go, 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 go. Let's build, let's build, let's build. And I think you'll see more and more clean energy in that build just because the economics are so strong. And then what you have here in America, you have this like kind of sluggish place that's like, oh, I don't really know what future we want here. Do we want AI? I don't know if we want AI. We got these data centers. I don't know if we want like these data centers. They're like, we're so confused about even what we're trying to accomplish here that we're building all of this energy, or we're building all these systems that need energy. We're complaining about a grid that can't deliver enough energy. And it's like, oh gosh, we got this system that's really messed up. Well, that's all true. At the same time, and we have companies. I just talked to this company, the CEO, like 2 days ago. It's a company called Lucend, Lucend, or they're transitioning. They're Cool Gradient, but they're rebranding as Lucend. They have AI for AI factories, and the AI for AI factories says an AI data center, right? This AI data center is so complicated. It's kind of like the butterfly effect, right? If something changes on the roof, it's going to trickle down through like all these complex systems throughout the AI data center, and it could make the AI data center far less efficient. So we've developed AI for AI factories or AI data centers to make the data center run far more efficiently, up to 40% more efficiently using the AI. And so is it all hypocritical? Yeah, maybe. And are we kind of a mess because we don't know what we want in America? I think so. But are we still like this ultimate place of innovation where you can actually develop the kinds of innovations that are going to have global influence? His technology is going to spread, and it's already spreading around the globe, 100%, because the AI factories are not just going to be in America. They're right. And they already are in many places around the world, and they're just going to spread. So you need those kinds of technologies, and you need those kinds of things that I still think it seems that America is the best place to do that kind of innovation and take it to scale. That's a long-winded answer
Okay.
for a
No, it's a
question that
good.
I'm still, trying to work my way through.
No, no, that's a great answer, and that's also a good segue to our actual the core topic in itself, right? Which is how companies today are deploying AI to build and scale low carbon innovations in the market. So, if you could just speak a little, to that based on your recent experience, we can get into that topic, and I can ask you a few questions related to questions I have personally about AI and then carbon emissions.
Yeah, this is an amazing thing to me, and I hear like you'll hear Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI, or you'll hear Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, who is a big AI proponent, and I think also is talks about the risks, but he's a very 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 prominent in the AI conversation. And these guys will say, well, we need AI, and don't worry because one day AI will also come up with so many of the answers that we need to solve climate change. And I sit here scratching my head and think like, yeah, man, that's already happening. Like all of these solutions that cut carbon emissions, as we're describing, I mean, I talk to companies all the time, and so many of their products could not exist without AI. I'll give you just a few examples. There's a company called Quilt that makes ductless heating and cooling systems for home. It's like a mini split system, if you've seen that, where you put the unit in your whatever room, and it's delivering heating and cooling from, in this case, from a heat pump. Now, a heat pump is like 3 times more efficient than natural gas. Okay, great. So it's already an efficient system. When you use a Quilt heating and cooling system, the system actually it is smart. So it learns your behavior and it says, okay, we know, or me, Quilt, the system, I know that at 8 p.m. there's 3 people in this room. Here's like where they tend to be. I know that it's going to kind of warm up, so I will start to warm this room in advance or cool this room in advance, depending on what the weather may be. I know what the weather is outside, so I know how that's going to influence the system, and I know the humidity, and I know the dew point, and I know all these other things that I'm going to use AI to make sure that room is as comfortable as possible using the least amount of energy as possible. Now, 3 months ago, Quilt did something that was never done before. These guys happen to come from Google. They're smart. They're smart software engineers. They did the first over-the-air update of basically an HVAC system in like the history of the planet. Just like if you have an electric car and you wake up in the morning, right, and suddenly like your car can tell you, can do things it couldn't do the day before, right, because the software got upgraded. They did it for an HVAC system in their customers' houses, who woke up the next day and their units were suddenly 20% more powerful, which meant that you could deliver far better cooling when it got really hot, right, or like it just had far more power. You didn't have to buy a new unit. It just delivered it, right? So it's like it's software enabled. It's AI that is building far better systems that are save energy, much more comfortable for the people who occupy those places. It's awesome. That's just one, right? But it's taking this dumb, old, industrial thing called heating, ventilation, and cooling, and actually bringing it into the 21st century. And then you see companies like Zoom. I was just talking with their chief marketing officer earlier today, and Zoom, Z-U-M, so not the video chat,
Right,
but
yeah.
right? Zoom is essentially applying very similar logic to the largest transportation system in America that we never think about, and that has more like commercial vehicles on the road that we never even think of as a national fleet, but it's school buses. School buses today and kids on school buses are having the same experience on that school bus as their great-grandparents had 100 years ago. The school bus hasn't changed. And so what that means, if you are the administrator of a school district and you are responsible for the school bus system, when those school buses leave the depot in the morning to go pick up the kids, in most places in America, no one has any idea where the bus is. Nobody knows. It's gone. The administrator doesn't know. The parents don't know. It's right. And what's happening is that school buses, this is crazy, are like chronically late in many, many school districts around the country. And because this is a localized issue, it doesn't necessarily get the national attention, but kids are waiting for the school bus and they're still getting to school late. and they're missing school by trying to do the right thing. And then coming home, parents have no idea when the kids are going to get home, right? And it's like they got to take off work, and they're just like, "Where's my kid?" It's nuts. So Zoom is like, "Well, here's what we'll do. Here's what we'll do." City of Oakland, where they started, and now all the way to Boston and Richmond and Nashville and Dallas and LA and Seattle, 4,000 schools across the country, some of the biggest school districts, said, "Look, we're going to bring a whole suite of technologies to know where the school bus is. And not only that, we're going to bring an app. So if your kid's not going to school in the morning, just open it up and be like, oh, Timmy's sick. The bus will reroute." And we'll use AI and we'll use smarter software to route those buses as intelligently as possible so everybody gets to school on time. And as we do that, we then start to realize, and this is what they did with the City of Oakland, they started to realize, like, hey, City of Oakland, you have 136 school buses. You only need 74. We've optimized your system. You only need to pick up the kids with 74 school buses. You can basically get rid of the rest. And the good news is we're going to give you like part of our service. We're going to electrify we're going to bring 74 electric school buses into your school system, and we're going to run the system. And we can afford to do that now because we no longer need 136 from your dumb old system. Now you have 74, and we'll plug them in so that we'll charge them up at night. But when they're idling and we no longer need that energy, we'll sell it back to the grid. And so we'll actually make more money so we can make this service really affordable for you, City of Oakland. And now more cities are actually going to go down that path. All starts with the AI unlock of optimizing those bus routes. I'll just pause because I could tell you 10 more that are equally amazing, but that's what AI enables.
Great example, Josh. A couple of questions there, right? Just for my clarity. A lot of what you said, I completely understood, but the one question I do have is, even before the advent of AI, now again, there's different schools of thought, but just again playing the devil's advocate in some of those cases, even with pure non-AI based software engineering, a lot of what you'd mentioned there could have potentially been achieved as well, correct? In other words, being able to track where the buses are, for the kids being able to report to say, hey, I'm not going to take the bus, so you don't even have to come try pick me up tonight or this morning or this afternoon. A lot of that could have been done even without, I mean, for someone who says that, yeah, maybe it's not that efficient because AI does generate a lot of code and we can build software a lot quicker and a lot cheaper today than we could like a year or maybe 2 years ago. But outside of that, a lot of this could have been done maybe without AI too, or no?
I think that's a very good point. And I think, I am not the AI expert. And often when I'm talking with founders, CEOs, like I mentioned, this company that's actually building the AI software to run the AI factories. That type of CEO will say to me, like, let me be very specific, Josh, about what we're calling AI and what's not AI and what is, because everything kind of gets lumped in as one thing, and that's not accurate to say. So I think, Krish, the point that you're getting at makes a lot of sense to me. I think if you're saying we're going to optimize whatever routes because we can look at, thousands and thousands of miles traveled on buses and figure out how to do that and crunch that data, obviously I think in that case.
Yeah, exactly. Right. The only reason I even bring that up is, right, Josh, I go to a lot of these conferences, hosted by, say, companies that are in the area here, and they bring a lot of these founders and CEOs of these large organizations, right? My favorite news organization is called Semaphore. They have these conferences in DC, and I try to go to as many of them as possible because they do a phenomenal job in just organizing it. And in a lot of the ones I went to recently, they brought these CEOs of these Fortune 500 companies, right? Like hundreds of them. And a lot of the questions were around AI. And naturally, it was also about energy because they go hand in hand, essentially. What I've seen from within the last 12 months, my takeaway, right, correct or wrong, is a lot of companies have started investing in it, right? A lot of companies have started investing in it. And it's not just the hyperscalers who are investing like billions of dollars. Even the ones that are not like hyperscalers are investing a fair bit of money. And last year, when I went to those conferences, the question was, what does your return on investment look like for all of those investments that you've made? The answers were there, but I didn't think they were necessarily very specific, at least not that I took away them as being very specific. This year, about 6 to 12 months later, I thought the answers were better. I mean, they had some numbers, right? They could have percentages about how their return on investments were starting to increase by their investments on AI. Yet I could not help notice a slight sense of, I don't know what the right word is, whether it's fear or skepticism or whatever that is. It's the same type of question that's being asked of these CEOs of these large companies, right? Like Google, like Alphabet CEO Sundar Pichai was asked, I think 2 quarters ago, in one of the earnings as to their spend was incredibly high. I mean, they've done really well the last 2 months in terms of the stock prices, but before that happened, they spent a lot of money and the stock tanked. I think a bit. I don't know if it was like 3 quarters before, and he had mentioned, I'm paraphrasing what he said, which was the risk of not over investing in AI was actually higher than the risk of investing. So they're going to have to do that, right? Which is what even Meta has done. Their stock tanked like 20% since their last earnings. So the point I'm trying to make here is everybody's trying to make these investments, including these large companies, and not everybody's accepting of the investments that are being made, right? The capex spend increasing, the Wall Street is not reacting the same way every single time. They're like, oh, you know what, you're spending so much money. No, we don't think so, right? So they drop like 20% or whatnot. So while on one side these investments are necessary, they are needed for the future, I think it's, I don't know, personally I think the jury is still out on the amount of investments that are being made in that space. So I just want to get your thoughts when we're talking about deploying AI to build and scale low carbon innovations. How do you see that from your experience? Do you see companies spending some dollars, a lot of money? Are they starting to see returns? And are they starting to see returns to the extent that they're expecting based on the investments that they've made actually in those areas?
Yeah, I definitely understand the conversation and the question and that you're asking, and the concern amongst investors saying, yes, AI is clearly the future, but if you spend $500 billion, are you going to make enough on that $500 billion for me to own your stock, right? Or like someone's
Right.
going to benefit, but is it going to be you, Google, or you, Meta, from all of that build up? What I see is, let's stay on the quilt example for a second, or this kind of, or maybe this HVAC concept. There's another company who does that on a commercial scale called Brainbox AI, and they can take a similar concept and they can go into a large, skyscraper and say to the owner of that building, we have a software solution to take over the thousands of valves and fans and controls your entire heating and cooling system for this really big building. We will save you up to 25% on your energy bill, right? And we know that heating and cooling is by far the biggest system in a building as far as like energy consumption. Or we'll save you up to 25% on your heating, let's say maybe your heating and cooling bill, up to 40% on your car. We'll reduce your carbon emissions by up to 40%. We'll give you far more control over your building. We'll start to get into predictive maintenance of which systems are starting to go out because we're going to see all of it. And we're going to be able to do that because we can actually predict with 96% confidence who's going to be occupying a certain floor of this building 6 hours from now, right? So we can gradually heat the building, heat that space, or gradually cool that space. We can run more energy when the grid is less carbon intensive, meaning we're more solar and winds running during the day. We can curtail power when energy is more expensive. We can do all these optimizations. But because we can predict the future with 96% certainty, we can provide all of these savings to you. That is the ROI. That solution spread into 17,000 buildings in about 4 or 5 years, and then Brainbox got acquired by Train because the solution actually is delivering. And you're seeing that roll out with some really big companies. And so who are now the customers of it? I can't remember if it's Dollar Tree or Dollar General, but they also liked it because they could also roll it out across hundreds of their buildings really, really fast. And so what I see when I talk to CEOs is that there's no going back. These AI is so integrated into what they're offering that it is how they deliver the value to their end customer in a way where, now I guess these are my myopic glasses. This is my myopic lens, but my myopic lens says, I hardly talk to a company today that's succeeding who isn't using AI in the product or service that they're offering to their own customers. So I feel very optimistic too. I mean, I don't know if Meta's going to like what the ROI is on Meta's AI spend, but I absolutely think that the the case for AI is extremely bullish, and I think the ROI for companies that are integrating AI is going to be very, very strong.
I'm very happy to hear that because I'm in that, there's multiple schools of thought, and I belong very strongly, lock, stock, and barrel to that school of thought. So anytime when the market reacts differently, I just start worrying if I've gotten it wrong, or it's just the natural course of things. So I'm actually very glad that you mentioned that. So okay, continuing with this part of the conversation, the next thing I want to ask you is, uh, you know so we both agree that AI is here to stay, right? Unless we learn otherwise, it seems like it's a decent area to bet on, right? I mean, it's I'd rather bet on that and be wrong than not bet on it, for instance. But that being said, from a carbon emission standpoint, from a low carbon strategy standpoint, so AI, I want to understand if AI can both help and hurt these low carbon strategies, right? Because you mentioned a lot of positive cases where things become more efficient. In the case of the bus example, there where the tools actually help you, do better. So you're optimizing your energy usages, but at the same time, to make that happen, we have to have these 1 gigawatt data centers, for instance. So where is the balance there, Josh? So is it possible that this is just a hypothetical question, but is it possible that we do things better using AI, right? We keep improving what we're doing, better software, better services. And you said most companies that you talk to are already using it. So the need for these tools and data centers is not going to diminish, right? It's going to keep increasing because Loudoun County has a number of them, and I think has one of the largest data centers in like Atlanta or in the southern part of the US, for instance. So it's not changing. So can we get into a scenario where we are using more energy because a lot of this is happening, but then we are more efficient because of AI, but at the net level, you've not made any improvements because how much ever carbon emissions are there today, they're going to continue to be at that level. It's just that we're able to do more with what we have, but the emissions do not actually reduce because our consumption has actually increased. I mean, does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. I think that what and of course I'm familiar with this, very familiar with this conversation, and I've asked myself this same question quite a bit. I think the assumption, though, in that question is that the energy mix we have today, the different sources of energy we use today, at the cost that we use them today, is stagnant and will persist at the exact same level into the future, right? So I think that's the underlying assumption when we ask that question and say, well, geez, we're creating all this energy. It's obviously going to be more carbon emissions. Yes, it's for some technology that could also reduce carbon emissions, but isn't it just all a wash? Maybe. But the thing that I would point you to, which I find fascinating, is fossil fuels are a natural resource, right? They're not a technology. And so I think on an inflation adjusted level, if you look back over the last 100 years, fossil fuels cost relatively about the same. Because it becomes more expensive to go find them, excavate them. You have to drill deeper into the ocean. That raises costs. At the same time, technology has helped lower those costs. And so at an inflation adjusted rate, I believe it stayed relatively the same. When you look at something like solar energy, though, solar energy is a technology, right? It's not a natural resource. And when you look at what's happened to the cost of solar over the last 5 or 6 decades since it's been commercialized, the price has dropped by 99%. I mean, that's a staggering figure, and I think it's dropped by something like 90% since 2010. And so that the declining, we're in the declining part of the curve. Now, if you extrapolate that out one more decade, and by the way, yeah, I mean, that's a learning curve, right? It's just like Moore's law for semiconductors or chips or whatever. Like, you double the output of a technology, you can almost predict the cost decline you're going to get in that technology. And it's a learning curve, right? It moves in one direction. If you project that out for solar for another decade, which no one seems willing to do. Not the International Energy Agency. No one seems really willing to do it, because you get to, the curve goes to some place that seems impossible, seems absurd. You almost get to free energy. You get to trivially cheap energy. Now, if you're just following the data and the evidence says that is what's going to happen. The evidence is more inclined to be like, that is what's going to happen, than the opposite, because it's happened for 6 decades. If you get there, it doesn't only have implications for how we run data centers and factories and everything else, but it means we can think about so many things differently. We can think about desalinating the oceans in places, right, where we're starting to lose access to fresh water. I mean, the entire future could be very different a decade from now, based on the price drop in renewables versus where we are today, just following the logic that's transpired over the last 5 decades. And so if you think about AI and you actually want to get to the AI future where you're going to go spend all this money, the biggest input is energy costs. So how are you actually going to go build $500 billion worth or $5 trillion or $10 trillion worth of AI data centers? Like, what are you going to power them with to actually make the economics work? It's going to be clean energy. And so clearly you hear I am very optimistic about what this may look like a decade from now, but I think that we grossly underestimate where we are on these curves in terms of renewables, because it's the same thing for batteries and the price drops in batteries and what that's going to mean when more batteries go in the grid and how we're able to use energy far more efficiently as a result of batteries as well. So I just think it's hard to take, if you look at today and just what's happening today, you could be pessimistic. If you play this out, a decade from now, I think the picture becomes really interesting and is far more exciting, and for me, very optimistic.
I think you said it beautifully there, right? And I had a chat with the founder of one of the data centers in one of the recent conferences I went to. A really nice guy, and he told me many things I didn't know. One of the things he told me that piqued my interest also was the fact that he said a 1 gigawatt data center consumes power that's equal to 1 million single family homes. Like, I had no idea. Like, not all data centers are 1 gigawatt. I think a lot of them in my area are probably like 250 megawatts or something along those lines, but they are pretty big. I don't know if I've seen one that's 1 gigawatt, but just to think that it consumes as much energy as 1 million single family homes do. And on an average, I think this data is from years ago when I came to the country, which is more than half a life back. I read something that was very interesting, which was the population of the US was less than 5% of the world's population at the time, but the energy consumed in the country was close to 30% of the world's energy. I was like, wow, I thought that was an interesting number. And this is from like years ago. So, as we come to the tail end of the podcast here, one other thing I'm going to have you do, Josh, is I'm doing a screen share here. So you're going to let us know which stocks we've got to pick so we can make money. I'm just kidding. So I just opened, I have a quick question for you, right? I just pulled up one of my portfolios here that I track, which is energy related. There's a lot of companies here, and there's a lot of volatility in the market in general. But I've noticed these energy companies, right? The need for energy is you name it, it's just incredible. And everyone talks about AI and GPUs and whatnot. There's not enough chatter, in my opinion, about the energy consumption needed for these things to actually happen. So this is just a small list of companies I almost see on a daily basis. There's like a 10%, sometimes it's even higher, right? Even on a day the market is very calm and not so crazy. So I just want to take your take. It could be a humorous take or a more serious take on why is there so much volatility if people are generally willing to accept that there is the need for AI and there is the need for energy to make AI happen. Why should there even be any volatility? Not mentioned to this extent.
Well, one, I'm excited to see some names on that list who have been on our show. We had the CEO of Sunrun, Mary Powell, on the show, so we had a great conversation with her about solar and battery storage for residential homes. So that's cool.
Oh my God, I look at that security almost every day. Thank you. Keep going. Yeah.
She's fantastic. She's really, really remarkable leader. And we had on a co-founder who's still a senior vice president with Enphase on the show not long ago to talk about batteries and some of the things they're doing as well, which was really a really fascinating conversation.
Amazing.
And I track some of those other ones too, and wonder the same thing when I see the volatility in the market. Today was a particularly volatile day. I am also, I do follow those companies as well in the stock market. I guess I'll leave it at that. I think that we are in this moment. It's a long moment, but this is a transitional moment. It's clearly, AI. I mean, AI and the need for energy really came out of nowhere. I mean, if you went to a dinner party 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and I mean, 5 years ago was COVID, so you probably weren't going to that many dinner parties, but you get the point. If you went to it, several years ago and someone was talking about data centers, that person would not get invited back to the dinner party because it would be the most boring conversation. Like you would just never bring it up. Today, everybody's
Right.
talking about data centers, right? It's crazy. It's crazy the moment that we actually find ourselves in. Everybody's talking about AI, of course, because it has personal implications for everybody, for their work, for their future. Like, never mind what it might mean for humanity. And then with the energy sources, the big question is, how much do we need? We've had flat energy consumption in America for, we had up until, really like kind of data centers and AI 2 or 3 years ago, the energy consumption was flat or slightly going down, or, for about 15 years. And so suddenly it's like, okay, demand's going up, generation's going up, consumption's going up. And the question is, what future really are we going to, right? Are we going to the future where all of this is going to get built out? AI is going to be a positive force. Meta is going to make money. Google's going to make money. Maybe we're underestimating how much infrastructure we actually need. Maybe 5 trillion, maybe OpenAI's, $500 billion that they need is actually too low, right? Maybe they're going to need $2 trillion, and maybe the revenue is going to show up because this is the most transformative technology we've had, in the modern world. Who knows? And I think that's the biggest takeaway is nobody actually knows. And that's why the volatility is so insane.
Josh, we talked about a lot about energy as we wrap this up. You have incredible energy and incredibly positive energy. So thank you so much for not just sharing your knowledge, which is just a lot as we can see, but also sharing it with such enthusiasm and passion, because it's very contagious, I tell you, right? It's just that sometimes you feel you talk to somebody that you believe in that, right? You have that interest, that innate interest, because you can't fake this. You just can't, right? Some of it, you have to be an incredible actor to fake some energies here, right? So I really appreciate that. So before we wrap up, two things, right? One is I'm going to have you ask me any questions if you have, but before I go, I'm going to ask you to do that. One question I ask of almost all my guests is, what is your favorite food? Like, what's your comfort food? You want to eat something, you're like, hey, I don't want to try, I'm hungry, this is what I want to eat, right? What is that food?
Sushi.
Wow, you know what? As a vegetarian, I've had very little sushi, and what I eat as sushi is probably not really sushi either. But the number of times people have actually told me on the podcast that they actually like it. One of them, I think, he actually described it in great detail. So sushi is very generic. So you're gonna have to do us a favor, Josh. Tell us a little bit more. What kind of sushi? Where is it in the US? Is it in Japan? Something a little bit more about the sushi that you do like.
Okay, that's fair. I think the reason for me, well, I would say sushi, is because one, it's probably not so much where, but when. And when I was growing up, my family, I grew up about an hour north of New York City, and my folks were always, very entrepreneurial. Eventually, they ran a children's summer camp up in New Hampshire. We lived in New York, and my dad also ran a private school that his father had started. And those businesses, when you're starting businesses, sometimes those businesses struggle, and then they hit a point where they actually start to become a little more successful. So in that moment, when they started to become a little more successful, when we were still, young, I would say I was probably in high school. My younger brother was maybe middle school, moving into high school. We started to actually like go out to dinner and go get sushi as a family, and I just always loved that. It's about that memory probably as well, of just, a moment with my
Lovely.
family, a moment with my parents. And then when I started my first company 2 decades ago, I was in Brooklyn. I started this company called Vivavi, like Viva V, Live Life, which was the derivation, which was this furniture company, like eco-friendly furniture company, modern design. I was so passionate about it that I was living in Greenpoint in Brooklyn. I turned my apartment into my furniture showroom, and I basically lived in my business, right? I was always living in my, I was so passionate about this idea of like, I've got to get these solutions, in front of people. And I couldn't afford a New York City showroom. Rents are really high. So I just, turned my large 2-bedroom apartment in like deep in Brooklyn into my store effectively. And so I was always in my business. And the, there was a sushi store right next door, or sushi restaurant, and they used to hook me up a little bit. And so at night, after a very long day, I could go down there and I just knew like, okay, if I had $20, I could spend $20 and I would get very definitely my full of sushi and kind of get that same satisfied feeling with people. It's just a nice space to be in after a really long day working and really being like so embedded in the entrepreneurial life that it was always just a nice like moment of like pause. So it's probably the
Wow,
win.
it's amazing,
Yeah.
right? It's a great explanation because sometimes you like music not for the particular song or the album necessarily, as much as it is because it reminds you of a certain phase of your life that you actually want to remember because it was nice or whatnot, right? So it's not just the song; it's the period of time in your life that song was associated with you. So very much like that makes complete sense. So the last thing was I've asked you a lot of questions. The easiest thing to do, or easier thing to do at least. Do you have any questions for me?
Well, I appreciate you giving me that opportunity. What is so? Yeah, I have a bunch of questions for you, but I'm very curious. What it's the you mentioned being in Loudoun County. You mentioned all the data centers coming in. Your particular part of the country is constantly in the news when AI data centers come up and what that means for communities. Um, what is I mean, I'm curious to get your personal perspective, and I'm also curious to hear the conversations that you have maybe with your neighbors or your friends locally about what's going on there, as you seem to be right at the tip of the spear, so to speak, in terms of, you know, AI data centers really popping up, which now will happen more across America.
Great question. Do you have like 10 minutes?
I do.
5 minutes? Okay, perfect. Yeah, and if it's too long, cut me short, not a problem, right? It's a great question, which is why, I was, some of the questions I asked you at the beginning were influenced by those conversations as well. And I'm not great at euphemisms, Josh, so I'm going to just say it as it is, right? When someone ran for office here, I don't know what the local. I'm not into politics by any stretch of the imagination, but they were running for I think one of the county positions, right? Local county positions. And we used to get flyers, right? And get all these flyers during election time. The only thing sometimes you have like 3 or 4 bullets, but this time I think there was only fewer than those. And the one that was very prominent was the fact that they would not actually they were anti data centers and they were going to do everything in their capacity to make sure that more data centers did not pop up in this area, right? And to me, as somebody who's like a political illiterate, if you will, I was like, you know what, these are big monstrous companies. I am always skeptical, thinking, can an individual citizen do this? You know what I mean? Can a single person do it? Because you don't necessarily look up to everybody like they're Martin Luther King Jr., right? You just look at them as normal people, like, can you pull this off? So when I see the flyer, I'm like, yep, no matter what you like or don't like, companies are big, they got a lot of money. You're not going to convince Mark Zuckerberg in not investing the billions of dollars if he had actually made up his mind to investing those billions of dollars, right? So what can you potentially do? But a lot of those flyers always spoke to why there should not be those data centers. And, people have these conversations about the energy consumption. And I saw a documentary 2 days ago on YouTube where I think Meta had this data center where the lady and her husband, senior citizens, live, and it's only a 400 foot from where they live. And they open the faucet in the kitchen, and the water just drips like a drop by drop or something, right? So they just said literally how they were impacted. So on one side, I can see, and it tells me that the noise also when you drive by those data centers, they are very very noisy, and sometimes they have these communities, Josh, where they're not too far, and they're not even newer communities. There's a homes that have been there for the last 4 or 5 years, and they are fairly expensive homes. This part of the country is not as expensive as, like, say, the Bay Area or Seattle maybe, but but Northern Virginia is not cheap by any stretch of the imagination, right? So they're reasonably pricey. So people bought these expensive homes, they have these 30-year loans, and then pop, a data center shows up, and what are you going to do with that, right? It's very annoying. It can be very annoying. So the benefits of those things for somebody who's not living in the neighborhood maybe is very different from people who are actually living there, for instance, right? The energy consumption, and I always wonder whether our energy costs will end up going up because I don't know if it's infinite, right? There's got to be finite amounts of energy to allow. I mean, I know renewable energy probably is infinite or something like that, but still, right? There's a cost factor associated with that. And it's also interesting because a lot of the people who live in the neighborhood here, Josh, are folks who are in the space of engineering, right? Now, I work at my startup and I've not done government work, not a whole lot, very little. But a lot of the people who live in the area, because it's a DC metro, are working for the government in some form or shape. So I don't know how much AI has made its way into the government side of things. I don't know, but I'm sure it's going to be there if it's not already there. Musk is there in DC most of the time, right? So it cannot be too far off. Uh, but on one side, people are making money by improving their engineering skills, learning AI or using AI to better build better software. At the same time, they're not happy with data centers being around. So my general question is, it's hypocritical one more time. On one side, you're benefiting from the influx of or the advent of AI because you're making more money and you're actually trying to keep your employment by being equipped with those skills. On the other side, you don't want those very data centers that need to be there for you to actually hone your skills and those for jobs to even exist, right? So I think it's kind of split, but the only positive thing, if it's even something that makes sense, is instead of those data centers, if regular companies had shown up, Josh, traffic, which already I believe is worse than the LA metro, as I read recently, DC traffic is getting really bad. There would be a lot more traffic. The only nice thing, if that is a nice thing about data centers, is you could have 10 of them, but nobody's going in or getting out. You know what I mean? There's not very many people working there apparently, right? So you don't have traffic because of those big buildings. So you can keep cruising along because nobody's turning in there or getting out. But otherwise, this is what I've seen, right? People are split. They're like, hey, I don't want them here. You can have the data centers. It can be 1 gigawatt data centers. You can have hundreds of them. Just don't have them in my neighborhood, right? A little bit selfish if you look at it that way. But that's what I've seen. But ultimately, I think you have to come to terms with it because I think Google Alphabet is opening a brand new data center in the southern part of India, and they're spending like, I don't know, it's like an $18 billion investment, I think. So it's not just here; they're cropping up everywhere in the world, right? So that money is going to be spent. Now, as a lot of us, you have to keep our fingers crossed because if things go okay or well, then I think the stock market's just going to be fine. But if somebody got this wrong somewhere, which I really hope that they did not, then I don't even know given all if you look at the price earnings ratios and PS ratios for a lot of these companies, it doesn't even make sense anymore, right? They're like, it's through the roof. I mean, you couldn't even invest in any of these companies personally if you went by the traditional ways of investing. So, I mean, it could get tricky, but hopefully it doesn't get there. At least I don't know if some of it made sense, hopefully, but that's my 2 cents, Josh. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. What I'm hearing is there's people are mixed. People understand that they can benefit from AI or AI is coming. It's just the negative impacts of having it in their neighborhood are pretty strong. And then I think that question of, in a place like Loudoun County or Washington, D.C., where it's already traffic's, already pretty miserable. Okay, these are investments that have a tax base connected to them where they'll pay a lot of taxes, right? So there's a benefit from that, but they don't bring the jobs. And depending on the community, that can also be a huge negative, right? We're going to have all these adverse impacts and we don't even get jobs. So I appreciate your perspective and it's really interesting to hear. Yeah, it's going to be even more, it's going to get more complicated, right?
The only thing I would add to that is, when you drive by and you see them all the time, you have no way to disconnect from what's happening, right? If you lived in a different neighborhood, maybe you work in that space of AI or energy and stuff. So, but when you're off work, maybe your mind doesn't think about it. But here, after you finish work, you go to Whole Foods to pick up something, you're driving by like 6 of them. So you have no way to escape what's actually happening there, right? So it's exciting. I love the DC Metro. As a small company, we need footage for whatever we do. So we create content. You end up in DC and you run into some incredible people. You mentioned Sam Altman. I've run into them like outside the White House, and I've gotten like footage for like 10 seconds, and it's amazing to just see like Dr. Lisa. So I'm like, oh my God, this is like Dr. Sue walking right in front of me or something like that. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. Again, just I'm gonna do a quick screen share to share your company, just so folks actually know. And we'll include the link to your company and your LinkedIn profile as well, Josh. So this is the link to Supercool. Folks, definitely subscribe to uh, Josh's podcast. I can tell how detailed and how specific all of this is actually going to be. It's just amazing. So thank you so much for humoring a lot of my ignorance in this space of carbon and emissions, Josh, but just not educating not just me, but just educating our audience as well. Really appreciate your time here.
Likewise, Krish. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
And talk soon. Yeah, bye bye.